Know-it-alls and spiritual ego. Who, me? One day, during my first few weeks at the monastery, I went to the small meditation chamber as usual, to start a new course. But there was a sign hanging on the door that said, "The next course is a special one just for the unfortunate few. IT is just for knowledgeable no ITALLS. Spiritual intellectuals who are spiritual ego disadvantaged. All others need not attend." I stood there puzzled for a moment, thinking about it. I eventually came to the conclusion that it must be a special course for some of the other novice monks. So I turned around and headed off for the library. Along the path, I ran into Zane. Literally. I ran into him. I wasn't watching where I was going, I was jogging. He was built like a brick wall, and walking the other way on the same path and right for a head-on collision. After I apologized, he asked me where I was going. "Aren't you scheduled to be attending a course right now?" he said. I started to explain, yes. "Well, it's that way." He pointed to the chamber, which was the opposite direction of where I had been going. "No. I mean yes. I mean, I was, but it's some kind of remedial course for the spiritually disadvantaged novices or something." Spiritually disadvantaged? Well, it said something like that. "It's only about 10 meters from here to there. Why don't you walk over and read it again, so you can explain it to me better? I don't understand." So I hopped on back and read the sign again, memorized it, and then recited it to Zane word for word. "You don't think that applies to you?" he said. "Of course not. I don't think I know everything," I protested. "Then why aren't you in there learning what you don't know?" "Because it's not about knowledge, it says it's for those who think they know it all. Do you know everything about your own spiritual ego and arrogance?" "No, of course not." "Then if you aren't aware of your own egotism, and you think that sign doesn't mean that you should attend that course, then all that can mean is that at least to some extent, you are a know-it-all. True?" Whoa. I had to think about that for a moment. This was worse than Zen paradoxes. "I guess you might have a point there. Thank you for acknowledging my point." "You're welcome." So I attended the course, which as it turned out, was probably more for me than anyone else there. And it may apply to you also. "You have a great deal of spiritual knowledge, don't you?" Raga said to me. "Yes. I have been studying since I was 13 years old," I said. "Then why are you here?" "Well, Have you achieved enlightenment?" "No. I don't think so." "Oh, you would know if you did. You'd know it far more easily than knowing if you'd been struck by a bolt of lightning. And that's why you're here. That's why you are taking these courses, and why you have chosen a teacher, and why you are reading all those books in the library. Because you are still searching for enlightenment. If you had found it, you would not be on this plane, or you would be an adept, and teaching others rather than reading books, even ancient texts. Because you would then truly know it all, at least spiritually speaking. You would have universal consciousness. You would not be struggling with yourself, or being self-centered or selfish anymore. You would only unselfishly love." I gulped. "I understand." A note for our readers. There are basically two kinds of people reading this book, and some who are combinations of the two kinds. The first kind of person is just reading it because it is unusual, but perhaps somewhat interesting reading. That includes those who are fascinated with lost civilizations, lost history, and mysterious technology. But the other kind of reader is one who is more into spiritual knowledge, studies, practices, abilities, etc. What some call a spiritual seeker. The remainder of this chapter is really addressed to them, and you may want to skip to the next chapter. Something to think about. A message for the spiritual seeker, or seeker of spiritual knowledge. There are those of you reading this book right now, who have collected spiritual and metaphysical knowledge for many years, and been involved with various spiritual paths, trends, or techniques. Some of you will read this book and say, yes, I already know, or, it's redundant, or I have heard these things before, I already know them, so this book is of little use to me. I don't mean to offend you or belittle your knowledge or wisdom. But if you have thought such things, ask yourself the following questions before you read any more of this book with that kind of attitude, or before you just file these teachings away with the rest of your knowledge. Are you already enlightened or universally conscious? There are various definitions of that, so here's what we mean by that. If you have achieved what we call enlightenment, you have taken the controlling reins of your life from your selfish separate self, and handed them over to your higher self, and the universal spirit. Have you done that? Has unselfish love replaced selfishness in your day-to-day life? And if not, have you dropped everything and rearranged the priorities in your life with the goal of achieving these changes as fast as possible? If the answer to the above is no, then the next question is, why? If you know the keys, why haven't you used them? If you don't know the keys, maybe somewhere in these pages something will click for you. Like I said, I don't mean to be insulting or offend you, I just want to help certain readers who might benefit from what I'm about to say. So please keep that in mind now, when I say this. While there are certain exceptions, if you are already enlightened, it is very, very unlikely that you would even be reading this book right now. You would likely have no need or interest in reading this book, because you would have achieved all you need. The searching stops. Those who have attained enlightenment, universal consciousness, or whatever you want to call it, generally no longer read books about spiritual teachings or philosophy, because they are of no use to them. They don't need them anymore. And when you don't need the things you once read a book for anymore, you change to where your interest in them falls away. You may still need books on plumbing, but that's a far more serious and interesting subject. It's not like being a doctor or something where you have to keep up on the latest advances. Sure, you could say there are degrees of enlightenment, and you might read something to achieve a greater degree than you have. But there is one biggie enlightenment that is like a light switch, and it's either on or off. So if you are reading this, and that big switch isn't turned on yet, for your own good, please put aside whatever you already know, just for a while at least. Even more importantly, please put aside any ego that could get in your own way. This could prevent you from getting a seemingly insignificant little piece of something out of this book that might help you become enlightened. Just read with an open mind and see where this takes you. Even if you were enlightened and found a book that sounds interesting, which is certainly possible, you wouldn't have the time to muse over it. When you become enlightened, you are very, very busy, helping others to attain the same freedom, peace, and unselfish love you have found, or you go on and ascend to a higher vibrational plane. If you stay, you work for the universal spirit, so to speak. You align your will with universal will, and thus you become very busy doing your little part in the universal flow. For example, at this point in my life, I don't read any spiritual or philosophical books. I no longer have the inclination, let alone the time. I did need to write this book though, because it was both my job to do so, in the service of the universal spirit, and my desire to help you. I've been forcing myself to write it while very ill, so I hope you get something out of it that will help you. Of course, like I said earlier, there was a time when I had a desperate desire and need for spiritual and philosophical information, and I did read everything I could get my hands on. Maybe that's the stage you're at in your life and evolution. I was desperately trying to find some answers, searching for some truth. I found bits and pieces of truth, but that wasn't enough, so I kept reading in hopes of finding consistent truth from one source. And after all the books, rather than finding what I was looking for in a book, I found it in my personal true teacher instead. What irony, eh? But there was nothing like this book out there when I was voraciously reading to find something. Not to say that it should do the same for you, because you may have a very different path. People do have different legitimate paths. But if I had read this book you are reading now, it would have at least been the end of the book part of my search. Because it would have answered my questions, and all the pieces of truth would have fallen into place as a whole. But again, maybe these teachings aren't your spiritual cup of tea, so to speak, and this book won't do the same for you that it would have for me. Maybe it's just one of your stepping stones along the way, and has some things you consider bits of truth. Or maybe you're not ready for it yet. Or maybe it is right for your path, but you're just afraid of the radical changes it would bring into your life, if you allowed yourself to realize and accept the truth, your truth. It's certainly not for me to say. But in any case, if you are still reading this book, you are probably still looking for something. And if so, just admit it. A long time ago, I discovered the hard way that it doesn't pay to be egotistical, self-centered, or cocky about what you already know. Humility never killed anyone, but cockiness has. Humility will get you to peace of mind and enlightenment faster than anything else. A spiritual ego will prevent it. So go ahead and let yourself go, and look very closely, with an open mind and heart. Spirituality is simple. Love is simple. Truth is simple. Enlightenment is simple. It's all basic stuff that we all really know deep inside somehow, yet most people don't live by it, and they've blocked it out. A book like this helps to remind you and inspire you. If you haven't gotten it yet, maybe this will help. If you think it's redundant, what can I say? How could it be redundant, if you haven't gotten it yet? I know I needed to hear certain things over and over, until I finally really did hear it, get it, and actually change. Some of you may already know everything you need to become truly great beings who are a blessing to all, yet you don't do what you need to do to achieve that. Why? What's your good reason? I've seen them all. Some continue to cling to the lives they've built. Jobs, friends, associates, have kids, hold on to the familiar shore. There are all kinds of excuses to avoid real change. Some people even use the search for spiritual knowledge, or sharing of knowledge, or even the search for a spiritual path, as a means to actually avoid change. It doesn't matter what the excuse is. It doesn't matter if it is clinging to a house, car, friend, lover, family, job, city, or whatever. It also doesn't matter what you fear. We all die someday, and such specifics of your life become irrelevant. So it doesn't matter if your reason for not going for it is the best reason in the world. The bottom line is this: whatever reason is holding you back from what you need to do to achieve enlightenment and oneness with God is not a good enough reason. The major arcanum of the ancient tarot represents the spiritual path from start to finish. The beginning and end of the path is represented by the Fool. The Fool lets go of everything in life to begin his spiritual journey. He has packed a knapsack, is looking up, and is stepping off into the jaws of danger, trusting all to God. The Fool has shucked his reasons for not getting on with his path. This is the kind of attitude one must have. And the knowledge of how to do it is not good enough. Knowledge can only point the way, you are the one who must actually take the journey. Remember, a little knowledge that acts is worth infinitely more than much knowledge that is idle. Khalil Gibran.